Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet, calm voice over a secure line. The voice belonged to Michael Wilson, though at Gate C-17 in JFK International Airport, nobody knew that yet. For Karen Hoffman, the gate agent who had just thrown a young girl's future into the trash alongside discarded coffee cups and chewing gum wrappers, that voice would soon become the sound of her world ending. She just didn't know it yet. Airports are curious intersections of authority and vulnerability. Within their sprawling terminals and echoing concourses, thousands of lives converge daily, each person temporarily surrendering control to a complex hierarchy of uniforms and protocols. Gate agents check your documents. TSA officers scan your belongings. Pilots determine your safety. In this carefully ordered ecosystem, power flows downward through badges and titles. But sometimes, very rarely, that flow is disrupted. Sometimes the person standing quietly in line, clutching a passport and a dream, holds more power than anyone could imagine. Sometimes the universe delivers a lesson in humility with the precision of an air traffic controller guiding planes through stormy skies. For 17-year-old Jasmine Wilson, standing shell-shocked at Gate C-17, watching her soiled passport sink beneath coffee grounds and banana peels, this moment represented the potential collapse of everything she had worked for. Her carefully planned future at MIT's prestigious summer aerospace program, her first independent journey, her chance to prove herself, all jeopardized by one gate agent's casual cruelty. For Karen Hoffman, the gate agent whose bitter resentment had crystallized into this single vindictive act the next few minutes would redefine her life. The satisfaction of putting someone in their place was about to be replaced by a reckoning so complete, so public, and so irrevocable that her name would become synonymous with consequences throughout the airline industry. As the shocked murmurs rippled through the gathered passengers and smartphone cameras captured what would soon become viral evidence, neither Jasmine nor Karen fully grasped what was about to unfold. But high above the eastern seaboard, in a room filled with glowing screens tracking thousands of aircraft, Michael Wilson was about to demonstrate that true authority doesn't need to raise its voice to move mountains, or in this case, to ground a Boeing 737-800 and everyone aboard it. This is the story of what happened at Gate C-17 when power dressed in plainclothes justice arrived without warning, and a father's quiet protection changed an industry forever. Dad, Dad, it came. Jasmine Wilson's voice echoed through their modest two-story home in Silver Spring, Maryland, 3 months before the incident at Gate C-17. She clutched a thick envelope bearing the distinctive red seal of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, her hands trembling with anticipation and fear. Michael Wilson emerged from his home office, reading glasses perched on his nose, a questioning look on his face until he spotted the envelope. His expression softened immediately. At 47, Michael had the calm demeanor of someone who managed crises for a living, but his daughter's achievements still brought an unrestrained pride to his eyes. "Well, don't just stand there shaking it," he said with a gentle smile. "Open it." Jasmine slid her finger beneath the flap, carefully extracting the contents. Her dark eyes scanned the first page, widening with each line. "I got in," she whispered. Then louder, "I got in, full scholarship, to the summer aerospace engineering program." Teresa Wilson appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's all this shouting about?" "Our daughter Michael," said, his voice thick with emotion, "just got accepted to the most prestigious pre-college aerospace program in the country." Jasmine stood frozen, rereading the acceptance letter for the 5th time. 16 students selected nationwide, 7 weeks of intensive study, direct mentorship from leading NASA-affiliated engineers, access to MIT's advanced simulation labs. It was everything she had dreamed of since she first looked up at the stars as a child and asked her father how planes stayed in the sky. That night, after the celebratory dinner where Teresa had prepared Jasmine's favorite jerk chicken with rice and peas, the young woman sat on her bed surrounded by brochures about the program. On her walls hung posters of the Hubble Space Telescope, the Mars Perseverance rover, and pioneering black female scientists. Her bookshelf contained well-worn copies of Hidden Figures and biographies of Katherine Johnson, alongside advanced physics textbooks. "May I come in?" Michael asked, knocking gently on her open door. "Sure, Dad." He sat beside her on the bed, picking up the MIT program schedule. "This is going to change your life, Jasmine. You know that, right?" She nodded, a mix of excitement and anxiety crossing her face. "What if I'm not good enough? What if everyone else there is smarter than me?" Michael placed the brochure down and turned to face his daughter. "Jasmine, listen to me. MIT doesn't make mistakes. They reviewed applications from hundreds of students across the country, and they chose you. Not because of luck, not because of quotas, but because you earned it. But, no buts," he said firmly. "You've been building model rockets since you were 9. You taught yourself differential equations last summer when other kids were at the mall. Your science fair project on airfoil design won state. You belong in that program." Jasmine smiled, drawing strength from her father's confidence. As the regional director of operations for the FAA's Northeast Corridor, Michael Wilson understood the aerospace world better than most. His job involved overseeing the safe passage of thousands of aircraft, daily managing air traffic controllers across multiple states, and implementing federal aviation policies. If he believed she could succeed, maybe she really could. "Will you tell me more about what you do again?" she asked, changing the subject. "About the command center?" Michael chuckled. This had been their ritual since she was small. Jasmine asking questions about his work, absorbing technical details that would have bored most adults. Well, imagine a room with 20-foot ceilings and a wall of displays showing every commercial aircraft currently in the sky over the Northeast. Controllers monitoring approach patterns, departure corridors, weather systems, and potential conflicts. Every decision made in that room affects thousands of passengers. Jasmine leaned forward. "And you're in charge of all that." "My team and I are responsible for making sure everything runs smoothly and safely. When something goes wrong, severe weather, technical malfunctions, security concerns, we're the ones who make the hard calls." "Like grounding planes?" Michael nodded. "Sometimes, yes. We have the authority to stop any flight if safety is at risk. It's not a decision we take lightly." "That's a lot of power," Jasmine observed. "It's not about power jazz. It's about responsibility." He squeezed her shoulder. "Just like this program isn't about showing off how smart you are. It's about using your gifts responsibly." Over the following weeks, Jasmine prepared methodically for her journey. She devoured prerequisite materials, created detailed study plans, and contacted former program participants for advice. Each night she fell asleep visualizing herself in MIT's labs, contributing to discussions, making discoveries. The girl who had once been too shy to raise her hand in elementary school was preparing to take her place among the nation's brightest young minds. But beneath her excitement lay a quieter emotion that she rarely voiced even to herself. As a young black woman entering a field still dominated by white men, Jasmine knew she would face scrutiny. Her peers might not. She had experienced it before: the raised eyebrows when she aced tests, the subtle surprise when she spoke knowledgeably about propulsion systems, the occasional comment about diversity candidates. Her parents had prepared her for this reality without letting it define her aspirations. Remember, Michael had told her once, after a particularly difficult encounter with a dismissive science competition judge, "Your excellence is not optional. It's necessary. Not just for you, but for those who'll follow your path." Now, as summer approached and her departure date grew closer, Jasmine Wilson prepared not just academically but mentally for the challenges ahead. She never imagined that before she could prove herself at MIT, she would first have to defend her right to board a plane. "Do you have your passport?" Teresa Wilson called from the bottom of the stairs. "Yes, Mom." Jasmine replied, trying to keep the exasperation from her voice. It's in the front pocket of my backpack, along with my boarding pass, student ID, and program acceptance letter. It was 5:30 a.m. on a warm July morning, and the Wilson household had been awake for nearly an hour. Jasmine stood in her bedroom conducting one final inventory of her belongings. Her 2 large suitcases were already in the car, packed with clothes, shoes, and personal items for the 7-week program. Her carry-on contained more precious cargo, her laptop, tablet, calculator, and several textbooks she couldn't bear to check in the hold. The most important book, Ignition. An informal history of liquid rocket propellants had been a gift from her father when she was 15. Inside the cover, he had written, "To Jasmine, who will one day write her own chapter in this ongoing story. Reach for the stars, but always remember where you launched from. Love, Dad." Jasmine tucked the book carefully into her backpack alongside her detailed notes on propulsion systems and orbital mechanics. She zipped up the compartment containing her passport and boarding pass, double-checking that everything was secure. Then, with one last look around her bedroom at the star chart on her ceiling, the desk where she had studied until her eyes burned the wall of academic awards, she shouldered her backpack and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, Michael was packing a small cooler with sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of water. "Airport food is highway robbery," he explained, noticing her amused expression. "And you never know when weather might delay your flight." Teresa was more emotional, trying to hide her tears by busying herself with breakfast preparations. "I've made your favorite blueberry pancakes with turkey bacon. Mom, you didn't have to." "Of course I did," Teresa interrupted, placing a heaping plate on the table. "Who knows what they'll feed you up there in Boston? Those New Englanders think clam chowder is a balanced meal." Jasmine sat down to eat, recognizing this for what it was, not just breakfast, but a farewell ritual. Her mother's cooking had always been an expression of love, and this morning's spread was practically a declaration. "Now remember," Teresa said, sitting across from her daughter, "call us when you land. And every night before bed. And if you need anything at all, we can be in Boston in 8 hours by car. Or 1 hour by plane," Michael added with a smile. "Which reminds me." He pulled a small card from his wallet and placed it on the table. "This has all my contact information, office number, cell phone, even the direct line to the command center in emergencies. If there's ever a problem you can't solve, call me, day or night." Jasmine picked up the card, recognizing her father's meticulous handwriting. This wasn't just contact information. It was a safety net, a reminder that no matter how independent she became, her family would always be her foundation. "I know, Dad. I'll be fine." "Of course you will," he agreed. "You're a Wilson, but having resources doesn't make you weak. It makes you prepared." At 6:15 a.m., they loaded into the family's SUV for the drive to Baltimore Washington International Airport. Jasmine sat in the back seat, watching the familiar streets of Silver Spring give way to the highway. The sky was lightening to a pale blue, promising a clear day for flying. "Weather looks good all along the eastern seaboard," Michael commented, checking his phone at a red light. "Your flight should be right on time." In the passenger seat, Teresa turned to look at her daughter. "Do you remember your first flight?" "You were only 4. Jasmine smiled. "To Grandma's house in Atlanta. I wore my special airplane dress and those light-up sneakers. And you explained cloud formation to the flight attendant," Michael added, chuckling at the memory. "Used your juice cup and straw as a demonstration. She gave me extra cookies." "Because you were adorable," Teresa said. "Still are." The conversation flowed easily as they drove, weaving between memories and practical advice. Michael explained the security procedures, reminding Jasmine to remove her laptop for screening. Teresa fretted about the dormitory accommodations, wondering if the sheets would be comfortable enough. As they approached the airport, Michael turned serious. "Listen, Jasmine. I want you to remember something important. When you're traveling, especially alone, you might encounter people who'll make assumptions about you based on nothing but their own narrow views. Jasmine nodded, recognizing this conversation. They'd had versions of it before major milestones in her life. If that happens, he continued, remember that you have every right to be exactly where you are. Be polite, but firm. Know your rights. And if someone in authority is treating you unfairly, document everything, names, times, badge numbers. The system isn't perfect, but it works better when people are held accountable. I know Dad, and if things get truly difficult, that's when you call me. Not as a first resort, but never hesitate if you need backup. Understood. Understood, she confirmed, not knowing how prophetic this advice would prove within hours. They parked in the short-term lot and walked together to the departure terminal. Michael insisted on helping with the check-in process, watching carefully as the agent tagged Jasmine's luggage for Boston's Logan International Airport. When they reached the security checkpoint, the point beyond which only ticketed passengers could proceed, the time for goodbye had arrived. Teresa embraced her daughter first, holding her tightly. "You are going to amaze everyone at that program," she whispered. "Just like you amaze us every day." Michael's hug was equally fierce. "Call us when you land," he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. "And remember what I told you. If there's a problem I can't solve, call you," Jasmine repeated. "That's my girl." He stepped back, straightening his shoulders. "Now go show MIT what a Wilson can do." Jasmine nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned and joined the security line, looking back once to see her parents standing together, her mother waving her father, standing tall and proud. She didn't know it then, but the lessons he had imparted about rights documentation and calling for help when needed would be tested sooner than any of them could have imagined. "This is your final warning, Karen. One more customer complaint, and we'll be having a very different conversation." Richard Thompson's words echoed in Karen Hoffman's mind as she unlocked the staff entrance to Terminal 5 at JFK International Airport. At 5:30 a.m., the early July air already carried the sticky promise of another sweltering New York summer day. Karen swiped her Skyglobe Airlines ID badge, barely glancing at the unflattering photo of a woman who looked far younger than her current 50 years. 22 years at this airline, she thought bitterly. 22 years of holidays, missed birthdays, celebrated with airport cupcakes, marriages dissolving under the weight of irregular schedules. All for what? To be threatened by Richard Thompson, a station manager 15 years her junior with an MBA and connections but no real understanding of how an airport actually functioned. The employee break room was mercifully empty. Karen stowed her purse in her assigned locker, straightened her Sky Globe uniform blazer, and checked her reflection in the small mirror mounted inside the locker door. The face that stared back looked tired, crow's feet deepening around blue eyes that had once sparkled with enthusiasm. Blonde hair now assisted to hide the gray, a tightness around the mouth that had become permanent in recent years. "Morning, Karen." She turned to see Alex Wilson entering the break room, his uniform still crisp, his young face unmarked by the years of passenger entitlement and corporate indifference that had worn down Karen's once pleasant demeanor. "Alex," she acknowledged with a nod. She didn't dislike the younger agent exactly, but his perpetual optimism grated on her these days. At 30, he still believed that hard work and a positive attitude would propel him upward in the company. Karen knew better. "We've got Flight 837 to Boston this morning," Alex said, pouring himself coffee from the communal pot. "Full flight, lots of first-class passengers. Thompson wants us to improve boarding times." Karen snorted. "Of course he does. Heaven forbid the precious elite passengers wait an extra minute to sip their complimentary champagne." Alex shifted uncomfortably. "Just passing along the message." Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down to see another demand from her ex-husband, tuition payment due Friday. "Your half is $4,500. Don't be late again." as if she needed another reminder of how her life had unraveled. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, ending a marriage that had effectively been over for years. Now she was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, paying alimony she couldn't afford, struggling with half of her son's college tuition and watching her mortgage slip closer to foreclosure each month. And through it all, Sky Globe Airlines had repeatedly passed her over for the supervisor position that would have eased her financial burdens. The most recent disappointment had come 6 months earlier when Diego Ramirez, just 5 years with the company, had been promoted to supervisor over her. The explanation had been delivered by Thompson himself. Diego brings fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to the role. We're looking toward the future of customer service. Translation. Diego was younger, less expensive, and part of the diverse new image Sky Globe wanted to project. Never mind that Karen had trained him. Never mind that she knew every procedure, every code, every contingency plan for the terminal. Never mind her decades of loyal service. Briefing in 5 minutes. Alex reminded her, interrupting her bitter reflections. Karen nodded, swallowing the last of her black coffee before following him to the small conference room where daily assignments were distributed. Richard Thompson stood at the front, tablet in hand, his perfectly tailored uniform making Karen even more conscious of how her own blazer pulled slightly at the buttons. "Good morning, Team," Thompson began, his gaze sweeping over the gathered gate agents. "We've got a busy schedule today, and I want to address yesterday's performance issues before we assign gates." Here it comes, Karen thought, mentally preparing for another lecture. "Our boarding efficiency was down 12% across all gates." Thompson continued. "Sky Globe prides itself on-time departures, and boarding delays create a domino effect throughout the system." He clicked through several slides showing performance metrics, emphasizing how their terminal compared unfavorably to others in the Sky Globe network. Karen barely listened. She'd heard variations of this speech hundreds of times over the years. "Karen and Alex, you'll be handling gate C-17 today. Flight 837 to Boston is a priority route with several VIP passengers." Thompson fixed Karen with a pointed look. "I trust you'll ensure a smooth, efficient boarding process." "Of course," Karen replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the implied criticism. After assignments were distributed, Thompson called Karen aside. "A word, please." Alex tactfully moved away, leaving Karen alone with the station manager. "Your performance reviews have been concerning lately," Thompson said without preamble. 3 passenger complaints in the last month, slower than average boarding times, and several colleagues have mentioned your attitude. Karen stiffened. "I follow all procedures exactly as outlined in the company handbook. This isn't about procedures. It's about approach. Sky Globe passengers expect more than technical compliance. They expect a positive experience. Even when they arrive late, demand special treatment and ignore basic instructions." Karen couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Thompson sighed. "Especially then. That's what customer service means, Karen. We're not just processing people. We're delivering an experience." The conversation ended with another warning and a reminder that her upcoming annual review would determine her future with the company. As Karen walked toward gate C-17, she felt the familiar burn of resentment building in her chest. Everyone wanted more from her, her ex-husband, her son, her managers, while offering nothing in return. She remembered a time when she had loved this job, when helping people reach their destinations had felt meaningful. Somewhere along the way, that satisfaction had curdled into something darker. The wealthy passengers in first class who never had to worry about tuition payments or foreclosure notices particularly rankled her. Their casual entitlement, their assumption that the world would accommodate their every need, it was a daily reminder of the stark divide between their lives and hers. "You okay?" Alex asked as they reached gate C-17 and began setting up for the day. "Fine," Karen replied curtly, logging into the computer system. "Let's just get through this flight." As the first passengers began to trickle into the gate area, Karen surveyed them with a practiced eye, mentally categorizing them into those who would follow instructions and those who would cause problems. A businessman typing furiously on his laptop, an elderly couple sitting closest to the boarding door, a group of college students with oversized backpacks, and then a young black girl, perhaps 16 or 17, sitting alone with a backpack at her feet. Karen noticed her first-class boarding pass sticking out of a passport cover, and something inside her tightened. The girl was dressed simply in jeans and a MIT sweatshirt, not like the typical first-class passengers in their business attire or designer clothes. Karen watched as the girl pulled out an advanced-looking textbook and began reading, seemingly absorbed in complex diagrams and equations. The sight stirred something complicated in Karen's chest. Her own son had struggled in school, showing more interest in video games than academics. Despite years of private tutoring that Karen could barely afford, he'd managed only average grades and a spot at a state college where he was now failing classes that Karen was still paying for. Yet here was this teenager clearly headed for a future of opportunities, traveling in first class like it was her birthright. Karen didn't stop to examine the assumptions underlying her growing resentment. She didn't question why the sight of this particular passenger triggered such a visceral response. She only knew that as the departure time approached, and her morning's frustrations simmered, the girl with the first-class ticket had become the focus of her darkening mood. "First boarding call in 20 minutes, Alex announced, checking the flight manifest. "Looks like a full flight." Karen nodded, her eyes still on the girl, a decision already forming in her mind. Today, someone was going to learn that the world didn't automatically yield to those who expected special treatment. Today, Karen Hoffman would be the one making the rules. She didn't know that her decision would not only end her career, but would permanently alter the landscape of customer service throughout the airline industry. She didn't know that the quiet teenager with the aerospace textbook was the daughter of one of the most powerful figures in American aviation. She didn't know that in a few hours her name would become synonymous with a cautionary tale told in training rooms across the country. Karen Hoffman only knew that for once she wanted to be the one with the power. And in that moment, that was enough. "Excuse me, which way to gate C-17? Jasmine Wilson stood in the bustling main concourse of JFK's Terminal 5, having just cleared security with 45 minutes to spare before her scheduled departure. The airport hummed with the particular energy of a Monday morning business travelers striding purposefully toward their gates, families corralling excited children, airline staff moving with practiced efficiency through the controlled chaos. "C-17. That'll be to your right all the way down past the food court," the uniformed information desk attendant replied, pointing down a long corridor lined with shops and restaurants. "About a 7-minute walk." "Thank you," Jasmine said, adjusting her backpack strap before heading in the indicated direction. The terminal's soaring glass ceiling allowed sunlight to stream onto the polished floors, creating an atmosphere that was both monumental and transient. Jasmine had always loved airports, these liminal spaces where thousands of individual journeys converged briefly before spiraling outward again toward countless destinations. Each person carried their own story, their own purpose. Her own purpose felt crystal clear as she navigated through the crowd. The MIT Aerospace Engineering Summer Program represented not just an educational opportunity, but a critical stepping stone toward her ultimate goal, becoming an aerospace engineer at NASA. The program acceptance rate was below 4%, and being selected as one of only 16 participants nationwide still seemed slightly surreal. As she walked, Jasmine pulled out her phone to text her parents. Through security, heading to gate now, flight still on time. Her father's response came almost immediately. "Perfect. Weather clear all along your route. Call when you land." Jasmine smiled, tucking her phone back into her pocket. Michael Wilson's constant awareness of flight conditions was both a professional habit and a paternal one, The FAA director who monitored air traffic patterns couldn't help applying that vigilance to his daughter's journey. Passing a wall of windows overlooking the tarmac, Jasmine paused. Outside, ground crews swarmed around aircraft in choreographed efficiency. Baggage handlers loaded cargo holds, fuel trucks connected to aircraft undergoing servicing. In the distance, a Sky Globe Airlines Boeing 737-800 was taxiing toward a runway, its engines emitting a muted roar that vibrated faintly through the glass. Jasmine studied the aircraft with the practiced eye of someone who had grown up memorizing aircraft specifications. The 737-800 featured the newer split scimitar winglets that improved fuel efficiency by approximately 2%. This particular model likely carried around 162 passengers in a dual-class configuration, cruising at about 0.789 Mach at 35,000 feet. The fact that she could identify these details that aircraft design fascinated her in a way that her high school classmates found bewildering only reinforced her sense that the MIT program was where she belonged. Continuing toward her gate, Jasmine passed crowded restaurants where travelers grabbed hasty breakfasts, shops selling overpriced convenience items, and electronic boards displaying departures, arrivals, and gate changes in a constant digital shuffle. She checked her boarding pass again. Sky Globe Airlines Flight 837 to Boston, departing at 8:30 a.m. from Gate C-17, Seat 2A, First Class. The first-class ticket had been her parents' gift, a celebration of her acceptance to the program. "You're flying toward your future," her mother had said. "You should do it in style." Jasmine had protested, initially aware of the expense, but they had insisted. "It's a milestone," her father had explained. "Some milestones deserve special recognition." When she finally reached Gate C-17, the waiting area was already half full. A digital display confirmed Flight 837 was on time. Behind the counter, two gate agents were preparing for boarding a younger man arranging boarding pass scanners and a middle-aged blonde woman whose tight expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Jasmine found an empty seat with a view of both the gate and the tarmac beyond where she could see her aircraft being serviced. She settled in, removing her dog-eared copy of Ignition from her backpack. The book, part history, part chemistry, textbook, part memoir, detailed the early development of rocket propellants with a wit rare in technical literature. She'd read it cover to cover 3 times already, but its contents never failed to inspire her. As she read, Jasmine became aware of the waiting area gradually filling around her. A silver-haired Hispanic woman in an elegant pantsuit took the seat to her left, offering a friendly nod before opening her e-reader. A white businessman in his 40s wearing an expensive suit and typing rapidly on his laptop sat across from her. 2 rows over a young white woman with a professional camera was documenting the airport scene, occasionally making notes on her phone. None of them paid particular attention to Jasmine, which was exactly how she preferred it. She'd experienced both extremes of visibility throughout her academic career, either being overlooked entirely or being singled out as the black girl who's good at math. Here she was, simply another passenger, her inner world of orbital mechanics and propulsion systems entirely her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Did you eat breakfast? There should be a banana in your backpack. Don't forget your allergy pills if they're serving nuts." Jasmine texted back a quick acknowledgement, smiling at her mother's perpetual concern. She returned to her book, losing herself in descriptions of hypergolic propellants and their applications until the gate agent's voice broke through her concentration. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sky Globe Airlines Flight 837 service to Boston's Logan International Airport." The female gate agent, Karen, according to her name badge, continued with standard announcements about the boarding process and carry-on limitations. There was something brittle in her delivery, a sharpness that seemed to go beyond professional efficiency. Jasmine checked her watch, 8:05 a.m. Boarding would begin soon. She carefully returned her book to her backpack and extracted her passport and boarding pass, making sure everything was readily accessible. First-class passengers would board first, which meant she needed to be ready. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, ground crew members were completing their preparations. A fuel truck pulled away from the aircraft. Baggage handlers loaded the last of the checked luggage. In the cockpit, Jasmine could see the captain and first officer running through their pre-flight checklist. The scene filled her with a familiar exhilaration. The complex systems, the precise procedures, the integration of human skill and mechanical engineering that made modern air travel possible. In 7 weeks, she would be studying the principles that enabled these massive machines to defy gravity learning from some of the greatest minds in aerospace engineering. But first, she had to board this particular aircraft. As the gate agent called for military personnel and families with small children to board, Jasmine gathered her belongings and prepared for her journey. The MIT program waited at the end of a 1-hour flight a short distance that would begin the longest, most transformative journey of her young life. She had no way of knowing that her path would be interrupted by an act of casual cruelty, or that her father's lessons about documentation rights and when to call for help would be tested before she even left the ground. That girl doesn't look like she belongs in first class. Karen Hoffman's muttered observation wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but Alex Wilson, arranging boarding passes beside her at gate C-17, heard it clearly. "Sorry?" he asked, glancing up from his task. Karen nodded subtly toward Jasmine, who sat reading her book, oblivious to the scrutiny. The teenager in the MIT sweatshirt. Her boarding pass shows first class, but look at her jeans and sneakers. Probably using someone else's ticket. Alex followed her gaze, then shrugged. Lots of people dress casually for flights these days, even in first class. And MIT, she's obviously smart. Karen's lips tightened. Smart doesn't pay for first class. Either mommy and daddy have money or something's not right. Before Alex could respond, Karen turned away to check the manifest on her computer screen. The flight was fully booked, 162 passengers, including 12 in first class. She noted the VIP designation beside several names, likely frequent flyers, whose complaints would get immediate corporate attention if anything went wrong. Across the gate area, the passengers awaiting Flight 837 created a microcosm of airport society. Sophia Rodriguez. The silver-haired woman seated beside Jasmine was returning to Boston after visiting her grandchildren in New York. At 63, the retired high school teacher had developed a practiced eye for recognizing young potential, and something about the focused intensity with which the girl studied her technical book resonated with her. "That looks like serious reading," Sophia commented, nodding toward Jasmine's book. Jasmine looked up, momentarily startled out of her concentration. "Oh yes, it's about rocket propellants. For pleasure or for school? Both, I guess. I'm heading to MIT for their summer aerospace engineering program." Sophia smiled. "Impressive. I taught high school physics for 30 years. Always loved seeing young women interested in STEM fields." Their conversation continued intermittently, Sophia drawing out details about the program while respecting Jasmine's natural reserve. The girl was clearly brilliant, but also humble, a combination Sophia had found rare in her decades of teaching. Several seats away, Thomas Blackwell frowned at his laptop screen where quarterly projections for his investment firm showed concerning trends. The 45-year-old executive had scheduled back-to-back meetings in Boston immediately after landing, leaving no margin for delays. His attention briefly shifted to the teenager conversing with the older woman, their discussion about orbital mechanics complex enough to surprise him. Not his usual seatmate demographic in first class, but the girl clearly had substance. Near the window, Emma Parker adjusted her camera settings to capture the play of morning light across the terminal. The 25-year-old travel blogger had built a modest following documenting airport experiences, particularly the human moments that occurred in these transitional spaces. She'd started her terminals photo series after college and had recently signed a contract with a travel magazine for a regular feature. "This lighting is perfect," she murmured, snapping a photo of an elderly couple embracing near the boarding door. She noticed the young black girl with the textbook, her expression animated as she explained something to the older Hispanic woman beside her. Emma raised her camera, instinctively capturing the moment of cross-generational connection before continuing her survey of the gate. Behind Emma, Luis Mendoza observed the pre-boarding procedures with professional interest. The 34-year-old off-duty pilot for a competing airline was heading to Boston for a training seminar on new safety protocols. He'd noticed the female gate agent's rigid demeanor during announcements and made a mental note to allow extra time when approaching the counter. After 15 years in commercial aviation, Luis had developed an intuition for which gate agents would strictly enforce every regulation and which would show flexibility. At 8:10 a.m., Karen's voice came over the gate microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now inviting our active duty military personnel and families with small children to pre-board SkyGlobe Airlines Flight 837 to Boston." A young Army officer in uniform and a family with twin toddlers approached the counter presenting their documents to Alex, who scanned them with efficient courtesy. Karen watched critically, mentally timing the process against Thompson's efficiency benchmarks. As the pre-boarding group entered the jet bridge, Karen prepared for the next announcement. The first-class passengers would board next the premium customers whose satisfaction ratings directly impacted terminal performance metrics. Her gaze drifted again to Jasmine, who was now putting away her book and checking her boarding pass. Something about the girl's self-possession irritated Karen on a level she didn't fully examine. There was an assurance in her movements that suggested she expected the world to accommodate her, an expectation Karen had seen countless times in privileged passengers who had never worried about mortgage payments or college tuition. "We would now like to invite our first-class passengers to begin boarding," Karen announced, her voice professionally modulated despite her inner turbulence. Jasmine stood gathering her backpack and checking that her passport and boarding pass were readily accessible. Sophia gave her a warm smile. "Enjoy the program," the retired teacher said. "The world needs more young women like you in aerospace." "Thank you," Jasmine replied with genuine gratitude before joining the short line forming at the podium. Thomas Blackwell was first presenting his credentials to Karen with the brisk efficiency of someone who flew weekly. She processed him quickly, her scanner beeping approval as he proceeded down the jet bridge. Sofia Rodriguez followed her documents equally in order. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She stepped forward, presenting her passport and boarding pass to Karen with a polite smile. "Good morning." Karen took the documents, her expression unchanged as her eyes flicked from the passport photo to Jasmine's face, then to the first-class designation on the boarding pass. She held them longer than she had for the previous passengers, her lips pursed into a thin line. "Is something wrong?" Jasmine asked, her voice quiet but steady. Karen tapped the boarding pass against the counter. "Where did you get this ticket?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear enough that several nearby passengers looked up. Jasmine blinked momentarily, caught off guard by both the question and its tone. "My parents purchased it for me. It's a graduation present." "Your parents?" Karen's eyebrow arched with theatrical disbelief. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a condescending whisper audible to those nearby. "Look, honey, sometimes people get tickets they aren't supposed to have. Maybe you're confused about your seat assignment. First class is probably not where you belong." The words landed like a physical blow. Jasmine felt heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and indignation flooding her system. Behind her, Thomas Blackwell shifted impatiently, checking his watch. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, keeping her voice steady, despite the tremor of anger she felt. "My name is Jasmine Wilson. The ticket is in my name. Seat 2A is mine." Karen's artificial smile returned, now laced with unmistakable contempt. "I'm sure that's what your boarding pass says, but we've been having issues with fraudulent documents lately. This passport," she flicked it with her fingernail, "doesn't look quite right." From his position at the adjacent scanner, Alex glanced over, a worried expression crossing his face. He had seen Karen's occasional power trips before, but this felt different, more personal, more targeted. "Karen, it looks fine to me," he said quietly, trying to intervene. Karen shot him a withering look. "I'll be the judge of that, Alex. I'm the senior agent here." She turned her attention back to Jasmine. Her eyes narrowed. "I'm going to need to see another form of ID. A driver's license, perhaps. Or a school ID with a hologram." Jasmine's mind raced through her options. Her learner's permit and school ID were packed in her checked luggage. The program acceptance letter was in her backpack, but would Karen even accept that as identification? "My passport is a federally issued valid form of identification." Jasmine stated, her voice firmer now as she recalled her father's advice about knowing her rights. "It's all I'm required to show." "That's where you're wrong," Karen snapped, her voice rising. Other passengers were now openly staring, some with confusion, others with growing concern. "I am the final authority at this gate, and if I say your ID is questionable, it's questionable. You're holding up the line. I think you should step aside." "I'm not stepping aside," Jasmine replied, lifting her chin slightly. "My documents are valid. You can scan them. You can verify my identity electronically. There is no legitimate reason for you to deny me boarding." Karen's face flushed with angry blotches. She had expected compliance, perhaps tears, not this composed resistance from someone so young. It felt like another challenge to her already tenuous authority, another indication that the world no longer respected proper procedures or chain of command. "You have a real attitude, you know that," Karen hissed, abandoning all pretense of professional courtesy. "People like you come in here thinking the rules don't apply, thinking you can just waltz into first class with documentation that doesn't add up." From behind, Jasmine Sofia Rodriguez stepped forward, her expression stern. "For heaven's sake," she said to Karen, "the girl has a valid passport. Scan it and let her on the plane. You're causing a scene for no reason." This intervention from another passenger, an older woman who herself had been processed without question, was the final provocation Karen needed. All her frustrations with her ex-husband, with her financial struggles, with Richard Thompson's warnings, with a world that seemed to reward everyone but her, crystallized into a single reckless impulse. She looked at Jasmine, then at the passport in her hand, and then at the small gray trash bin beside the podium. Something dark and vindictive flashed in her eyes. Nearby, Emma Parker sensed the escalating tension and raised her camera instinctively. Luis Mendoza straightened in his seat, professional alarm bells ringing in his mind. Thomas Blackwell stopped checking his watch, suddenly alert to the confrontation unfolding at the counter. "This is what I think of your valid ID," Karen declared, her voice dripping with contempt. With a deliberate flick of her wrist, she tossed Jasmine's dark blue passport into the trash bin. The small booklet didn't just land on top. The bin contained the morning's refuse-used napkins, empty coffee cups, banana peels, and the wet grounds from the staff room's coffee maker. The passport landed with a soft, sickening thud, the golden eagle on its cover immediately stained by a smear of coffee grounds. A collective gasp rippled through the gate area. Alex stared in horror, momentarily frozen by the sheer unprofessionalism of Karen's action. Emma's camera clicked, rapidly capturing the moment in high-resolution detail. Luis half rose from his seat, his pilot's instinct for crisis management kicking in. "Oh my God," Thomas exclaimed loudly. "Did you just throw her passport in the garbage?" "She threw her passport in the garbage." For a moment, Jasmine couldn't breathe. The shock of watching her passport, her legal identification, her travel document, her key to the program she had worked so hard to attend, being casually discarded like trash, was overwhelming. Tears welled in her eyes, born not of sadness, but of pure outrage and humiliation. You can't do that," she stammered, her voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "That's a federal document. You have to give it back." Karen crossed her arms, a smug, unrepentant expression settling on her face. "I don't have to do anything. You're not a passenger on this flight anymore. You have no valid identification. Now I suggest you leave the gate area before I call security." The cruelty was so blatant, so unnecessary, that for a moment the entire gate area seemed suspended in collective disbelief. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a procedural dispute. It was a deliberate abuse of power played out in front of dozens of witnesses. And as smartphone cameras began to record the unfolding scene as other passengers rose in protest, as Alex fumbled for the procedure to handle this unprecedented situation, Jasmine Wilson reached for her phone. Her father's words echoed clearly in her mind. "If there's ever a problem you can't solve, call me." This was without question a problem she couldn't solve alone. With trembling hands, she dialed the number that would connect her to the most powerful ally she could imagine, the man whose quiet voice could bring a 200-ton aircraft to a standstill with a single command. Pre-boarding complete. First-class passengers, please have your boarding passes and identification ready. Karen Hoffman's announcement cut through the ambient noise of Gate C-17, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had made the same statement thousands of times before. For most passengers, it was merely background noise, another step in the familiar airport ritual. For Jasmine Wilson, standing in line with her MIT acceptance letter now clutched in one hand and her boarding pass in the other, it was the prelude to a confrontation she never anticipated. The first-class line was short, just 6 passengers waiting to board the Sky Globe Airlines Boeing 737-800 bound for Boston. Thomas Blackwell stood at the front, his expensive Italian leather briefcase gleaming under the terminal lights. Behind him, Sofia Rodriguez adjusted her silk scarf, a small act of dignity that had become habitual during her decades of travel. Jasmine stood third in line, trying to project a confidence she wasn't entirely feeling. 2 middle-aged businessmen and a woman in a crisp pantsuit completed the queue. "First-class passenger to the counter, please." Karen called, her gaze sliding past Jasmine to focus on Blackwell. The executive stepped forward, handing over his boarding pass and passport with the efficient movements of someone who flew weekly. Karen scanned his documents with professional swiftness, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Enjoy your flight." Sophia moved forward next, presenting her documents with gracious poise. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. Karen's response was noticeably cooler, but she processed the retired teacher without comment. "Down the jet bridge on your right." Then it was Jasmine's turn. She stepped to the counter, carefully placing her boarding pass and passport on the surface. "Good morning," she said, matching Sophia's polite tone. Karen's demeanor changed instantly. The professional mask slipped, revealing something harder and more personal as she picked up the documents. Her eyes flicked from the passport photo to Jasmine's face with unconcealed suspicion. "This is a first-class boarding pass?" Karen stated flatly. "Yes, it is," Jasmine confirmed, maintaining her composure. "Seat 2A. Karen's fingers tapped against the counter, a rapid staccato betraying her inner tension. "And how did someone like you end up with a first-class ticket?" The question hung in the air, its implications clear enough that even passengers not directly involved in the exchange glanced over. Thomas Blackwell, already halfway down the jet bridge, paused and turned back, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "My parents purchased it as a graduation gift," Jasmine explained, keeping her voice even. "I'm attending a program at MIT this summer." Karen's expression hardened further. "MIT? At your age? And your parents just happen to have first-class money?" From his position at the adjacent scanner. Alex Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Karen, we should keep the line moving. Other passengers are waiting." Karen ignored him, focusing entirely on Jasmine. "Where are your parents now?" "At home in Maryland. I'm traveling alone." "Convenient." Karen's tone dripped with skepticism. She held up the passport, examining it under the overhead lights as if searching for flaws. "This looks irregular." Jasmine felt her heartbeat accelerate, a mixture of confusion and indignation rising within her. "My passport is perfectly valid. It was issued 3 years ago." "That's your claim," Karen countered. but we've seen an increase in fraudulent documentation recently. People trying to access services they haven't paid for. She emphasized the word paid with unmistakable meaning. Behind Jasmine, the businessman checking his watch sighed loudly. Is there a problem here? Some of us have connections to make. Karen's eyes narrowed further. Sir, I'm performing necessary security protocols. If you're in a hurry, perhaps you should have arrived earlier. The atmosphere at gate C-17 had shifted palpably. What should have been a routine boarding process had transformed into something tense and uncomfortable. Emma Parker, the travel blogger, had stopped pretending to check her phone and was now openly watching the exchange her journalistic instincts activated by the unusual confrontation. I don't understand what the issue is, Jasmine said, struggling to keep her voice steady. My documentation is in order. My boarding pass is valid. There's no legitimate reason to delay my boarding. I determine what's legitimate at this gate, Karen replied, her voice hardening further. And I'm not convinced you belong in first class with these documents. The statement was so blatantly prejudicial that several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Luis Mendoza, the off-duty pilot watching from his seat, straightened up, professional concern overriding his natural reluctance to get involved. Excuse me, he said, approaching the counter. I couldn't help overhearing. Is there a specific regulation being enforced here? Karen's head snapped toward him. This doesn't concern you, sir. Actually, as a fellow aviation professional, I'm curious about the documentation standard being applied. Luis persisted, his tone collegial but firm. The young lady's passport appears to meet all ICAO standards from what I can see. Karen's face flushed with angry blotches. Are you a Sky Globe employee? No. Then please return to your seat and wait your turn. Luis raised his hands in a placating gesture and stepped back, but his intervention had drawn even more attention to the situation. Phones were being raised throughout the gate area, recording an incident that was rapidly escalating beyond a routine boarding disagreement. Listen, Jasmine said, drawing on reserves of patience her father had helped her develop. If there's a specific concern about my documentation, you can call the verification number on the back of my passport. Or you can check my name in your system. I'm in your passenger database because I have a confirmed booking. Karen's expression shifted to something uglier. Are you telling me how to do my job now? No, I'm just suggesting. Because it sounds like you think you know better than someone with 22 years of experience? Karen continued, cutting her off. That kind of attitude is exactly the problem with your generation. Entitlement. Expecting special treatment. Alex moved closer, alarm evident on his face. Karen, maybe we should call Richard to handle this situation. We don't need... Richard. Karen snapped. I am perfectly capable of identifying suspicious documentation. She turned back to Jasmine, holding up the passport. This doesn't look official to me. The photo could be anyone. Sophia Rodriguez, who had paused in the jet bridge upon hearing the escalating confrontation, stepped back into the gate area. Young lady, she called to Jasmine. Do you have any other identification with you? Jasmine shook her head. My other ID is in my checked luggage, but a passport should be sufficient for domestic air travel. It is... Sophia confirmed, turning to Karen. As someone who has taught civics for 3 decades, I can assure you that a valid passport is more than adequate identification for boarding a domestic flight. This delay seems arbitrary and unnecessary. Karen's posture stiffened further. Ma'am, you've already boarded. Please continue to the aircraft. Not until this situation is resolved appropriately, Sophia replied, her teacher's authority evident in her tone. This young woman has provided proper identification. Your refusal to accept it requires explanation. Other passengers were now openly watching, some filming with their phones, others murmuring among themselves. The businesswoman in the pantsuit had stepped out of line, entirely moving to stand beside Thomas Blackwell, who had returned from the jet bridge to observe the unfolding scene. This is ridiculous, Thomas said loudly. I've flown first class on Sky Globe for 15 years and I've never seen anyone interrogated like this over a perfectly valid passport. Karen's control was visibly slipping, her professional demeanor crumbling under the combined pressure of passenger scrutiny and her own simmering resentments. "If everyone would mind their own business," she said sharply, "we could complete boarding without further delay. We would be completing boarding if you would simply scan her documents like everyone else's," Sophia pointed out reasonably. Alex attempted one final intervention. "Karen, the passport looks completely legitimate to me. Let's just process it and continue boarding." It was the wrong thing to say. Karen, already feeling undermined by the passenger intervention, perceived her colleague's comment as the final betrayal. Her face contorted with barely suppressed fury as she looked from Alex to Jasmine to the passport still clutched in her hand. "You want me to process this?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Fine. I'll process it right now." With deliberate slowness, she turned toward the small gray trash bin positioned beside the counter. The bin was half filled with the morning's detritus: used napkins, empty coffee cups, discarded boarding pass printouts, and the soggy remains of a fruit cup someone had abandoned. "This is what I think of suspicious documentation," Karen announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Then, with a flick of her wrist that seemed to happen both in slow motion and too quickly to prevent, she dropped Jasmine's passport directly into the trash. The moment crystallized in the gate area: Karen's vindictive satisfaction, Jasmine's shock, the collective intake of breath from witnesses. Emma Parker's camera captured it all, the passport landing atop a used coffee cup, brown liquid immediately seeping into the navy blue cover, obscuring the Golden Eagle emblem. "Oh my God," someone gasped. "Did she just—" She threw her passport in the trash. Alex stood frozen, horror evident on his face. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially criminal. Destruction of federal documents carried serious penalties. Jasmine stared at the trash bin, momentarily unable to process what had just happened. The passport her parents had helped her obtain for their family trip to Jamaica 3 years ago, the official document containing visa stamps and entry records, was now soaking up coffee grounds and banana peel residue. "You can't do that." She finally managed her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a federal document." Karen folded her arms across her chest, unmoved by the reaction her action had provoked. "What I can't do is allow fraudulent documents to be used at my gate. You're not boarding this flight. In fact, you should leave the terminal before I call security." "This is outrageous!" Sophia exclaimed, her professional composure finally breaking. "I've never witnessed such inappropriate behavior from airline staff in my life. What is your employee number? I want to report this immediately." Thomas Blackwell had already pulled out his phone. "I'm recording this," he announced, "and I'm calling Sky Globe's executive customer service line right now. I have their direct number." Luis Mendoza approached the counter again, his expression grave. "Ma'am, as an aviation professional, I feel obligated to inform you that interfering with a federal identification document may constitute a federal offense. I strongly advise you to retrieve that passport immediately." Karen's moment of satisfaction was rapidly souring as she realized the extent of the reaction her impulsive act had triggered. But rather than backing down, she doubled down. "All of you need to return to your seats," she ordered. This person attempted to board with questionable documentation. "I've made my decision. She will not be traveling today." Jasmine felt tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pure, frustrated rage. This woman had just casually thrown away her identification, her documentation, her literal ticket to the future she had worked so hard to secure. And now she stood there unmoved and unapologetic, as if she had every right to derail a young woman's plans on a whim. In that moment, Jasmine remembered her father's parting advice at the security checkpoint. "If there's a problem you can't solve, call me." This was definitely a problem beyond her capacity to solve alone. With slightly trembling hands, she pulled her phone from her pocket and stepped away from the counter. She found her father's number and pressed call, turning her back on the continuing commotion at the gate. As the phone rang, she took deep breaths, trying to compose herself enough to explain the situation clearly. Baldwin Michael Wilson answered, his voice businesslike. "Dad," Jasmine whispered, and then a sob broke through a raw, ragged sound that immediately transformed her father's professional tone. "Jasmine, what's wrong? Are you okay, Dad? You have to help me." She managed the words catching in her throat. "The gate agent, she took my passport. She threw it in the trash. She's saying I can't board, that my documents are fake. Everyone's watching and I don't know what to do." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, just long enough for Michael Wilson to process his daughter's words and make the transition from concerned father to FAA director with the authority to intervene. "I'm handling it," he said, his voice calm but with an undertone of steel that Jasmine recognized immediately. "Which airline? Which gate?" "Give me the details." "Sky Globe Airlines, Flight 837 to Boston. Terminal 5, Gate C-17. The gate agent's name is Karen. Dad, my passport is in the trash. She just threw it away in front of everyone." "Stay on the line," Michael instructed. "Don't engage with her further. Just wait. I'm making calls right now and I'll be there personally in 20 minutes. This stops now." As Jasmine stood with the phone pressed to her ear, the ambient sounds of the airport seemed to recede. Behind her, passengers were still protesting, Karen was still defending her actions, and Alex looked increasingly panicked. But Jasmine felt a strange calm settling over her. Her father was coming, and in less than half an hour, everything about this situation would change. "Where do you think you're going? We're not finished here." Karen's sharp demand cut through the gate area as Jasmine stepped away from the counter phone pressed to her ear. The gate agent's face had flushed a deeper red, her authority visibly threatened by Jasmine's refusal to simply accept the humiliation and leave. "I'm calling my father," Jasmine replied, her voice steady, despite the tears that had briefly overwhelmed her. "He'll want to know why a Sky Globe employee just threw my passport in the trash." Karen's expression flickered between uncertainty and renewed defiance. "You can call whoever you want. It doesn't change the fact that you're not boarding this flight, not without proper identification. The identification you just threw away." Thomas Blackwell interjected, his phone still recording. "Which was perfectly valid until you decided to toss it in the garbage." The confrontation had now drawn the attention of virtually everyone in the gate area. Passengers already aboard the aircraft were craning their necks to see the commotion through the jet bridge entrance. Those still waiting to board had formed a rough semicircle around the counter, many with phones raised to capture the increasingly tense exchange. Alex Wilson looked desperately toward the main terminal, hoping to spot Richard Thompson or any other supervisor who might help defuse the situation. Karen had crossed a line he'd never imagined she would breach, and the potential consequences were escalating by the second. "Karen," he said in a low, urgent voice, "we need to call Richard right now. This has gone too far." "I don't need Richard," she snapped back. "What I need is for everyone to stop questioning my authority and let me do my job." Emma Parker, the travel blogger who had been documenting the incident, stepped forward with her professional camera still raised. "For the record," she said clearly, "can you explain why you felt it necessary to dispose of a federal identification document? I'd like to quote you accurately in my article." The mention of an article of public documentation beyond the immediate witnesses seemed to penetrate Karen's defensive bubble for the first time. Her eyes darted to Emma's press badge, then to the professional-grade camera, then to the numerous cell phones still recording. "I'm not giving interviews," she said stiffly, "and everyone needs to stop filming right now. This is a secure area." Actually, Luis Mendoza, corrected from nearby federal courts, have consistently held that filming in public areas of airports is protected by the First Amendment as long as it doesn't interfere with security screenings. This gate area definitely qualifies as public. Karen's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Who are you people? Why is everyone suddenly an expert on airline procedures and federal law? I'm a commercial airline pilot, Luis replied calmly. Aviation regulations are my daily reality. I taught constitutional law at Boston University before retiring, Sofia Rodriguez added. And I'm an executive with over 3 million flight miles who's witnessed hundreds of boardings, Thomas Blackwell contributed. Never once have I seen a gate agent throw away a passenger's passport. Karen's position was crumbling, but rather than acknowledging her error, she reached for the gate microphone. Security to gate C-17, she announced, her voice echoing through the terminal. Passenger disturbance requiring immediate assistance. Meanwhile, Jasmine stood slightly apart, still on the phone with her father. Dad, she's calling security now, she reported, keeping her voice low. She's saying I'm causing a disturbance. Stay calm, Michael Wilson instructed from his position at the FAA command center. I've already contacted JFK's air traffic control tower. The aircraft is under a ground stop. It's not going anywhere until I arrive. I've also alerted Port Authority police to the situation. They'll be sending officers who report to me, not to the airline. How long will it take you to get here? Jasmine asked, watching nervously as Karen continued to defend her actions to the increasingly hostile crowd of passengers. I'm leaving now. Keep the line open, but you don't need to talk. Just stay where you are and avoid further engagement with that gate agent. In the background of the call, Jasmine could hear her father issuing rapid-fire instructions to someone else, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a high-ranking federal official accustomed to crisis management. Back at the counter, Karen's call for security had created a new problem. 2 Sky Globe customer service representatives from a neighboring gate had arrived, their expressions confused as they took in the unusual scene. What's going on? Karen asked the older of the two, a woman named Patricia Miller, who had worked with Karen for several years. We heard your call for security. Before Karen could answer, Sophia stepped forward. This gate agent, she said, pointing directly at Karen, just took this young woman's passport and deliberately threw it in the trash. She's refusing to retrieve it and now threatening to have security remove the very person she's victimizing. Patricia's eyes widened as she looked from Sophia to Karen to Jasmine, who stood quietly with her phone still pressed to her ear. Karen, is that true? Patricia asked, her voice low with disbelief. The passport was suspicious. Karen insisted, though her tone had lost some of its earlier certainty. I made a judgment call based on inconsistencies I observed. She threw it in the garbage, Thomas interjected, holding up his phone to show Patricia the video he'd recorded. Deliberately. After multiple people, including your own colleague, told her the passport was perfectly valid. Patricia watched the video clip with growing horror, her professional composure barely masking her shock. Karen, you need to retrieve that passport immediately. This is completely outside our procedures. I will not, Karen replied, folding her arms across her chest. My decision stands. This person does not have valid identification and will not be boarding this flight. The identification was valid until you threw it away, a passenger shouted from the back of the crowd. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Passengers scheduled for boarding were becoming increasingly agitated both by the delay and by witnessing such a blatant abuse of authority. Those who had already boarded were pressing against the windows of the aircraft, trying to understand the reason for the holdup. Inside the cockpit of Flight 837, Captain Alicia Martinez was growing concerned about the delay. She activated the intercom to the gate. Gate C-17, this is Captain Martinez. We're 20 minutes behind schedule for pushback. What's the status on boarding? Karen reached for the receiver, but Alex intercepted it first. Captain, we have a situation at the gate. There's been an incident with a passenger's documentation. We're working to resolve it. What kind of incident? Martinez pressed. We have a tight arrival slot at Logan. Any further delay will impact our entire route schedule. Before Alex could respond, his console lit up with an incoming message from air traffic control. His eyes widened as he read the text. Urgent Flight 837 under FAA ground stop. Do not initiate pushback. Further instructions to follow. Captain Alex said, his voice unsteady. I've just received notification that Flight 837 is under an FAA ground stop. No reason specified. A ground stop, Martinez repeated incredulously. The weather is clear all along our route. Check again, that must be a mistake. It's not a mistake, Captain Alex confirmed, reading the message again. This comes directly from JFK Tower on authority from FAA Northeast Command. In the gate area, the arrival of 2 Port Authority police officers created a momentary lull in the confrontation. Officer James Sullivan, a veteran with 15 years of experience at JFK, assessed the scene with practiced efficiency. What seems to be the problem here, he asked, addressing the question to no one in particular. Karen immediately stepped forward. Officer, we have a passenger attempting to board with fraudulent documentation. When questioned, she became disruptive and incited other passengers against airline personnel. That is absolutely false, Sophia objected forcefully. This young woman presented a valid passport, which this gate agent, she pointed directly at Karen, deliberately threw into that trash receptacle. Multiple witnesses can confirm this, and several have video evidence. Officer Sullivan's expression remained professionally neutral as he turned to Jasmine. Miss, is this accurate? Your passport was disposed of by airline staff. Before Jasmine could answer, Karen interrupted. She presented suspicious documentation that did not appear authentic. As the senior gate agent, I made the determination that I wasn't speaking to you, ma'am, Officer Sullivan said firmly. I'd like to hear from the young lady. Jasmine lowered her phone slightly, keeping the line to her father open. Yes, officer. I presented my valid U.S. passport as identification for boarding. The gate agent questioned its authenticity without specific reasons, then deliberately threw it into that trash bin. Multiple passengers witnessed this and several recorded videos of the incident. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully, then turned to his partner. Jenkins, would you please secure that trash receptacle? We may need to retrieve the document as evidence. Officer Jenkins moved to stand beside the bin, effectively preventing anyone from tampering with its contents. Now, Sullivan continued, addressing Karen directly. I'd like to see your identification and position authorization, please. Karen's face paled slightly. Am I being accused of something? I was performing my duties according to airline security protocols? I'm not accusing anyone of anything at this point, Sullivan replied evenly. I'm investigating a reported incident involving a federal identification document. Your cooperation would be appreciated. As Karen reluctantly reached for her Sky Globe ID badge, Alex's console chimed with another urgent message. His eyes widened as he read it. Karen, he said, his voice now unmistakably alarmed. Richard Thompson is on his way to the gate. And he swallowed hard. The message says, FAA Regional Director Michael Wilson will be arriving within 15 minutes. We're instructed to secure the scene and take no further action until they arrive. The name Michael Wilson seemed to mean nothing to Karen, but it sent a ripple of whispers through the airline staff present. Patricia Miller's hand flew to her mouth in shock. The FAA Regional Director, she whispered. Why would he be involved in a boarding dispute? Jasmine, still standing quietly with her phone, allowed herself the smallest smile. Her father was coming, and with him a reckoning that Karen Hoffman could never have anticipated when she so casually tossed a young girl's future into the trash. The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple boarding dispute, beyond even the public humiliation of a passenger. It had become a perfect storm of documented misconduct, federal authority, and imminent accountability. And at the center of it all stood a 17-year-old girl who had simply wanted to board a plane to pursue her dreams. I've worked for this airline for 22 years. 22 years without a single passenger complaint on my record. Karen Hoffman's declaration rang hollow in the tense atmosphere of Gate C-17. Around her, the evidence of her professional implosion was inescapable. passengers with recording phones, airline colleagues looking on in horror, and 2 Port Authority police officers securing the scene of what might well be a federal offense. "Would you like to check that claim against our database?" Patricia Miller asked quietly. "Because I've personally handled at least 3 complaints about your customer service in the past year alone." Karen's face flushed deeper. Minor misunderstandings all resolved internally. Nothing like this circus. She waved her hand dismissively at the gathered crowd. "This circus is entirely your creation," Thomas Blackwell pointed out, still recording. "No one forced you to throw a federal document in the trash." The mention of the passport seemed to trigger something in Karen, not remorse, but a doubling down on her justification. "I maintain that the documentation was suspicious. The photo didn't clearly match. The binding looked irregular." "That's simply not true," Alex interjected, finding his voice despite his usual deference to Karen's seniority. "I saw the passport clearly. It was a standard valid U.S. passport with no visible irregularities." Officer Sullivan, who had been observing this exchange while waiting for backup and the promised arrival of the FAA director, now focused his attention on the trash bin where Officer Jenkins stood guard. "Let's settle this directly," he said. "We'll retrieve the passport and examine it." "No," Karen stepped forward, placing herself between Sullivan and the bin. "That's airline property now. It was surrendered during the boarding process." Sullivan's eyebrows rose. "Ma'am, a U.S. passport is the property of the federal government, not the airline. Interference with federal documents is a serious matter. Step aside, please." Karen hesitated, the reality of her situation beginning to penetrate her defensive armor. Around her, the gate area had fallen silent, dozens of witnesses watching this critical moment unfold. Step aside. Sullivan's voice left no room for argument. With visible reluctance, Karen moved away from the trash bin, her hands trembling slightly as the gravity of her actions began to sink in. Officer Jenkins carefully pushed aside discarded napkins and coffee cups, his face grimacing at the task. "I can see it," he reported. "It's definitely a U.S. passport soaked in coffee grounds." "Retrieve it, please," Sullivan instructed. Jenkins extracted the passport, gingerly holding it by one corner. The once pristine navy blue cover was now stained an ugly brown, the golden eagle emblem partially obscured by wet coffee grounds. He placed it on a clean napkin on the counter. "Jesus," someone in the crowd muttered. Sullivan examined the soiled document without touching it. "This appears to be a standard United States passport issued within the last 5 years. He looked up at Karen. "Can you explain why you believed this was fraudulent?" Karen's composure was cracking visibly. The photo didn't seem to match. "And she's so young for a first-class ticket. So you threw a federal document in the trash because a young black woman had a first-class ticket?" Thomas Blackwell asked incredulously, deliberately stating what many had been thinking but hadn't articulated. "That's not... I never said," Karen sputtered, but her denial rang hollow in the face of the evidence. Jasmine, who had remained calm throughout this exchange, her phone still connected to her father, finally stepped forward. "May I see my passport, please?" Sullivan nodded. "Don't touch it yet. We'll need to document this properly." Jasmine looked down at her soiled passport, the document that contained her travels, her identity, her legal right to cross borders. She thought of her parents taking her to the passport office 3 years ago, explaining the importance of this small booklet, the pride she'd felt receiving her first official identification. Now it lay defiled on the counter, a visual representation of how Karen had perceived her worth. "Officer," she said quietly, "I'd like to press charges." Sullivan nodded solemnly. "That's your right. We'll take your statement formally once additional officers arrive." At that moment, Richard Thompson burst into the gate area, his face flushed from running. The Sky Globe station manager took in the scene with visible horror. The police officers, the damaged passport, the crowd of recording passengers, and Karen standing isolated at the counter. "What in God's name is happening here?" he demanded, approaching the counter. "I just received an alert that Flight 837 is under an FAA ground stop because of an incident at our gate." Karen looked to him for support. Richard, this passenger, was attempting to board with suspicious documentation. "I was following security protocols when—" "She threw a passenger's passport in the trash," Patricia Miller interrupted flatly. "It's all on video. Multiple videos." Thompson's face went from flushed to ashen. She did what Alex stepped forward, pointing to the soiled passport. Karen questioned the authenticity of this passport without valid reason, then deliberately disposed of it in the trash bin when the passenger and others defended its legitimacy. It was a judgment call, Karen insisted, though her voice had lost its earlier conviction. "If everyone would just calm down." "Calm down," Thompson echoed incredulously. "Karen, do you have any idea what you've done?" "The FAA regional director is on his way to this gate personally. The entire aircraft is grounded by federal order. This isn't just a customer service issue anymore." Karen's face paled. "The FAA director? But why would he?" She never finished her question. At that moment, the crowd at the gate parted to admit 3 figures walking with purpose toward the counter. In the center was Michael Wilson, his tailored suit and commanding presence immediately drawing all eyes. Flanking him were Nicholas Bennett Sky Globe's director of operations and another Port Authority police officer of higher rank. The atmosphere in Gate C-17 shifted instantly. Even passengers unfamiliar with Michael Wilson's position could sense the arrival of genuine authority, not the petty power Karen had wielded, but the real weight of federal oversight. Jasmine lowered her phone at last, relief washing over her features as she made eye contact with her father. Michael gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of reassurance before focusing his attention on the scene at the counter. Director Wilson Thompson said, stepping forward with an extended hand, "I'm Richard Thompson, station manager for Sky Globe at JFK. I want to assure you that whatever has occurred here does not reflect our company policies or values." Michael shook his hand briefly but didn't respond to the platitude. Instead, he approached the counter where the damaged passport lay. "Is this the document in question?" he asked Officer Sullivan. "Yes, sir. Retrieved from that trash receptacle." Sullivan gestured to the bin. "We've secured videos from multiple witnesses showing it being disposed of by the gate agent." Michael examined the passport without touching it, his expression granite. After a moment, he looked directly at Karen, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Are you Karen Hoffman?" he asked, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge. Karen nodded, unable to find her voice. "I am Michael Wilson, FAA Regional Director of Operations for the Northeast Corridor. I've just grounded an entire aircraft because of your actions today." He paused, letting the statement sink in. "Now I'd like you to answer a simple question. Did you throw this United States passport into that trash can?" The gate area was utterly silent. Even the ambient airport announcements seemed to have paused for this moment of reckoning. Karen looked desperately to Thompson, to Nicholas Bennett, finding no support in their horrified expressions. Her gaze returned to Michael, to the ruined passport, and finally to Jasmine, who stood watching with quiet dignity. "Yes," she finally admitted, the word barely audible. "But I had concerns about its authenticity, based on what specific indicators Michael pressed." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth that her suspicion had been based on nothing more than her own prejudices and bitter resentment couldn't be articulated without damning herself further. "I made a mistake in judgment," she finally said. "A mistake?" Michael repeated his tone, making it clear how inadequate that characterization was. "Ms. Hoffman, you didn't misplace a boarding pass or misread a seat assignment. You deliberately seized and destroyed a federally issued identification document belonging to a lawful passenger. He turned to Officer Sullivan. I want her formally charged under Title 18, Section 1544 of the U.S. Code for misuse of a passport. I also want charges filed for interference with passenger screening procedures under 49 CFR Part 1540. Sullivan nodded. Yes, sir. We'll process those charges immediately. Wait. Karen gasped, the reality of criminal charges finally breaking through her defenses. I wasn't trying to. You seized and destroyed federal property, Michael stated flatly. Your intentions are relevant to sentencing, not to the fact of the offense. He turned to Thompson and Nicholas Bennett. Sky Globe Airlines is now facing an FAA investigation for allowing this to occur. I expect Ms. Hoffman's employment to be terminated immediately, and I want a full audit of your hiring and training practices within 30 days. Bennett, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Of course, Director Wilson. Her employment is terminated effective immediately. Sky Globe Airlines will fully cooperate with any investigation. Thompson, looking physically ill, reached for Karen's employee badge. I'll need that along with any company property. Karen's hands shook as she removed her badge, her composure finally collapsing entirely. This isn't fair, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. 22 years of service and one mistake. This wasn't a mistake. Michael interrupted, his voice cold. This was a deliberate act of cruelty and an abuse of whatever authority you believed you possessed. And it wasn't directed at just anyone. It was directed at my daughter. A collective gasp rippled through the gate area as the final piece clicked into place. Jasmine Wilson wasn't just any passenger. She was the daughter of the FAA regional director. Karen Hoffman had chosen the worst possible target for her display of petty power. Karen's face drained of all remaining color. Your daughter, how could I have known? That's precisely the point, Michael said, his voice steady but carrying enough force to silence her instantly. You couldn't have known who she was, just as you can't know who any passenger is. That's why procedures exist to ensure everyone receives fair professional treatment regardless of who they might be. He turned to his daughter, his expression softening slightly. Are you all right, Jasmine? She nodded. Yes, Dad. I'm okay. Michael returned his attention to the airline representatives. My daughter will be boarding this flight as ticketed in seat 2A. The passport will be retained as evidence, but I've already authorized a temporary travel document for her use today. Once this situation is resolved, we'll process an emergency replacement passport. Nicholas Bennett nodded rapidly. Of course, Director. We'll ensure she's accommodated with all courtesy. That's the very least you can do, Michael replied. He addressed Officer Sullivan next. Please escort Ms. Hoffman from the terminal. Her airport credentials are to be revoked immediately. As two officers moved to position themselves on either side of Karen, the former gate agent seemed to deflate completely. The armor of bitter entitlement that had sustained her through years of perceived slights and frustrations crumbled visibly. In its place was only the hollow recognition of a career and reputation destroyed by her own actions. I just wanted to be respected, she whispered, though whether to herself or those around her wasn't clear. No one ever respected me. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through authority. Michael replied, not unkindly but firmly. Perhaps that's a lesson worth learning even now. As Karen was led away, her Sky Globe blazer already removed, her badge and credentials confiscated, the passengers who had witnessed the entire drama remained silent. There was no cheering, no celebration of her downfall, only the solemn recognition that they had witnessed both a profound injustice and its consequent accountability. For Jasmine Wilson, standing beside her father as order was restored to Gate C-17, the incident represented something beyond personal vindication. It was a stark reminder that systems could work, that justice could prevail, that standing up for oneself and knowing when to call for help were lessons as valuable as any she would learn at MIT. And as boarding finally resumed, as passengers were guided onto the aircraft that had been temporarily grounded by her father's command, Jasmine realized that this unexpected detour on her journey had taught her something essential about power privilege and the long arm of justice that no classroom could have conveyed. Flight 837. This is JFK Tower. Your ground stop has been lifted. You are cleared to prepare for pushback at your discretion. Captain Alicia Martinez exhaled audibly as the controller's message came through her headset. For the past 45 minutes, her Boeing 737-800 had sat immobile at Gate C-17, passengers' increasingly restless flight schedule in disarray, and no clear explanation forthcoming beyond the cryptic security incident at the gate. Copy that tower. Beginning pre-pushback checklist, now she responded, glancing at her first officer with visible relief. Any idea what happened out there? First Officer David Reynolds asked, gesturing toward the terminal. Martinez shook her head. Something serious enough for an FAA ground stop. That doesn't happen over minor customer service issues. As the flight crew began preparations to finally depart, the last passengers were boarding through the jet bridge. Among them was Jasmine Wilson, now escorted by Nicholas Bennett himself, the Sky Globe Director of Operations, maintaining a respectful but attentive presence as she made her way to Seat 2A. Ms. Wilson, on behalf of Sky Globe Airlines, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the unconscionable treatment you experienced. Bennett said, his corporate training barely containing his genuine mortification. Your experience today violated every standard we claim to uphold. Thank you, Jasmine replied. Everything is fine now. Bennett nodded, clearly relieved by her composed response. If there's anything at all you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask any crew member. They've all been briefed on the situation and are committed to ensuring your comfort. As he moved away, Sophia raised an eyebrow. I've flown first class for 20 years and never had the operations director personally check on my comfort. You've made quite an impression. Not the one I would have chosen. Jasmine admitted a hint of wry humor emerging through her lingering discomfort. Perhaps not, Sophia acknowledged, but sometimes the most powerful impressions are those we didn't plan. I suspect Sky Globe Airlines will remember the name Wilson for quite some time. Outside on the tarmac, ground crew members guided the aircraft away from the gate, signaling the physical conclusion of the morning's dramatic events. Inside the terminal, Michael Wilson watched the departure briefly before turning his attention to the administrative aftermath that now required his focus. In a small office temporarily commandeered for FAA use, he was dictating a preliminary incident report to his deputy director in Manhattan via speakerphone. The primary violation involves Title 18, Section 1544, regarding misuse of a passport, he explained. Secondary violations include interference with passenger screening procedures under 49 CFR Part 1540. Port Authority Police have filed initial charges and the U.S. Attorney's Office has been notified given the federal nature of the offenses. What about Sky Globe's corporate response? Lisa Chen asked from the other end of the line. They've terminated the employee effective immediately and have committed to a comprehensive review of their training and oversight procedures. I've established a 30-day deadline for their initial report and recommendations. Do you anticipate broader regulatory action? Michael considered the question carefully. The incident itself warrants a focused investigation rather than system-wide penalties. However, the underlying issues, particularly the apparent pattern of discriminatory treatment in Karen Hoffman's customer service history, suggest the need for a more extensive review of complaint handling and employee monitoring throughout the airline. As they continued discussing the formal aspects of the regulatory response, Michael maintained his professional focus while remaining acutely aware of the personal dimensions that had precipitated his involvement. The line between his role as FAA director and his identity as Jasmine's father had momentarily blurred that morning, a convergence that had produced swift justice, but also raised questions about privileged access to institutional power. "Lisa, one final point," he said, addressing his deputy director. "I want the final report to acknowledge explicitly that my personal connection to this incident created an unusually direct response. While the regulatory actions taken were appropriate to the violations observed, we should be transparent about the circumstances." "Understood," Lisa replied. "Will you be recusing yourself from any aspects of the follow-up investigation?" "I'll recuse myself from decisions regarding specific penalties against Ms. Hoffman, given the personal nature of the offense. You'll oversee that portion of the case. I'll remain involved in the broader policy review since that affects systemic issues beyond this specific incident." As Michael concluded the call, his phone rang almost immediately. Robert Walsh, the CEO of Sky Globe Airlines, whose morning had undoubtedly been upended by reports of the confrontation at JFK. James Walsh began dispensing with formalities. "I'm calling to offer my most sincere, profound, and unreserved apology to you, and more importantly to your daughter, Jasmine. I've seen the preliminary report from our station manager and reviewed video clips of the incident. There are no words to describe how appalled I am. This is not who we are as an organization." Michael detected the carefully crafted corporate contrition in Walsh's tone, but also recognized the genuine alarm beneath it. A CEO didn't personally call a federal regulator unless the situation was deemed truly critical. "The evidence suggests otherwise," Robert Michael replied coolly. What happened today wasn't a system failure. It was a human failure, enabled by a system that either doesn't train its people properly or doesn't care what they do. This wasn't just rudeness. It was an act of prejudice that escalated to the commission of a federal crime. "You're right," Walsh conceded immediately. "You're absolutely right. Karen Hoffman has been terminated, of course. Her file is being turned over to authorities. But that's not enough. This can't just be about one employee. This has to be a catalyst for change." Michael waited, letting the silence extend just long enough to underscore the gravity of the situation. "I am personally overseeing the development of a new mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training program for all customer-facing employees," Walsh continued hurriedly. "And I'd like to name it in Jasmine's honor the Wilson Protocol, if you'd permit it. A permanent reminder of our commitment to preventing such incidents." It was a smart move, both a genuine attempt to create meaningful change and a shrewd public relations strategy. Michael considered it carefully before responding. "That is a start," he acknowledged. "I'll expect a full report on my desk in 30 days detailing the curriculum and implementation schedule. The FAA investigation, however, will proceed. We need to be certain this is an isolated incident and not indicative of broader issues within your organization. The principles of flight remain constant. Lift must overcome weight. Thrust must exceed drag. But who generates that lift and provides that thrust that can and must evolve?" Jasmine Wilson's words resonated through the lecture hall where nearly 100 young women attending MIT's Women in Aerospace conference listened attentively. Now in her sophomore year, Jasmine had been invited to address participants about her research in propulsion systems and her experiences as a woman of color pursuing aerospace engineering. The conference represented a fitting bookend to the journey that had begun 2 summers earlier with her disrupted flight to the MIT program. That initial obstacle, Karen Hoffman's attempt to prevent her from boarding, had not only failed to derail her path, but had ironically accelerated certain aspects of her progress and visibility within the field. The Wilson Protocol, now implemented across multiple airlines and referenced in aviation training programs nationwide, had created a legacy extending far beyond Jasmine's personal experience. Michael Wilson had leveraged the incident into a broader reform initiative that addressed long-standing issues of bias in passenger service throughout the industry. For Jasmine herself, the most significant outcome had not been the policy changes or the public attention, but the internal growth she had experienced, the reinforced confidence in her ability to overcome obstacles, and the practical knowledge that systems of accountability, while imperfect, could function when properly engaged. As she concluded her presentation and students approached with questions about both her technical research and her personal journey, Jasmine recognized that her story had become something more than a viral incident or a cautionary tale. It had become a testament to resilience, to the power of appropriate intervention, and to the importance of creating institutional structures that protected individual dignity. The passport that Karen Hoffman had tossed into the trash that Monday morning had long since been replaced. But what could never be discarded was the lesson learned at Gate C-17 that prejudice might temporarily impede one's journey, but with the right support and the proper engagement of accountability systems, no obstacle could permanently prevent those with talent and determination from reaching their destination. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share these powerful stories of justice, accountability, and personal triumph with a wider audience. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't loud confrontation, but knowing exactly when and how to call upon the systems designed to protect us all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.